The Rings of Power tells the story of how the world of Lord of the Rings came to be, but the most anticipated story has to be for Gondor, and fans got a little teaser in the season finale. Bronwyn tells Galadriel about plans to lead her people toward an old colony. Does this mean they could be heading for Gondor? Here's everything we know.
Where will you go? An old Númenórean colony, by the mouth of the Anduin. Pelargir, they called it.
First off, is this the first time Gondor was teased? Elendil and Isildur set sail for Middle-earth in the Rings of Power Episode 6 on Amazon to save the Southlands. Naturally, it seems impossible to resist the urge to predict their destiny on these shores. Elendil said they were sailing into the dawn, yet it felt like the coming of the night as the sun rose over Middle-earth. This line refers to when Elendil makes this same voyage in the future when the darkness will fall over Númenor and the sun will rise over Gondor. Elendil was originally hinted by the Rings of Power to beware of Númenor's coming destruction since he understood the importance of Nimloth's falling petals. It's only natural for him to predict the dawn of Númenor's darkness and his destiny to form a new kingdom in Middle-earth. Not to mention, Isildur also foreshadows Gondor. The strongest Gondor clue in the Rings of Power comes from Elendil's observations about the sun rising over Middle-earth and darkness falling over Númenor. But it's not the only one, because his son also gives us some hints. After the battle, the Númenóreans gather, and Ontamo asks Isildur what he thinks of Middle-earth. Isildur says, "I like the mountains," despite being visibly depressed by the land's lack of Númenor-like grandeur. Even though the statement is mostly lighthearted, it foreshadows Isildur's doom. The mountains he's referring to are probably the Ephel Death, the same range that would eventually define Gondor's eastern border. Isildur will see lots more mountains, so it's good he enjoys them, but that's not all. Another sign of Gondor's destiny can be found in the interactions between the Númenóreans and Southlanders in the Rings of Power. The differences between these two types of men seems fairly obvious, with the Númenóreans outclassing their relatives in Middle-earth. Besides that, the Southlanders need a good king so badly that they agree to have Halbrand rule them without question. This controlling dynamic sets the stage for Elendil's arrival in Middle-earth following Númenor's destruction, his proclamation of himself as their legitimate monarch, and his eventual, mostly uncontested ascension to the throne. Moving on, how was Gondor found in The Lord of the Rings? When Eru Ilúvatar annihilates the island in retaliation for its heresy fueled by Sauron, only Elendil, Isildur, and 9 ships carrying the other devoted Númenóreans are saved. They send boats to Middle-earth, where Elendil immediately places himself as ruler. Elendil's ascension was made much easier because Middle-earth was already populated by Númenóreans who had either fled their own homes or been exiled for their support of the Valar, so the new arrivals were given a warm welcome. Afterward, Elendil went north and established the Kingdom of Arnor, which stretched from Lindon to the Misty Mountains and included places like the future Shire. In the meantime, Isildur and Anarion traveled to the south, founded Gondor, and assumed their father's throne. It's impossible to match the Rings of Power timeline directly to J.R.R. Tolkien's to determine when Gondor will arrive in the Amazon series because it's pretty condensed. But even though it's condensed, there's a lot of ground to cover. The creation of the Rings of Power, the ascent of Sauron, and the Dark Lord's corruption of Númenor haven't happened yet. Even though the groundwork for Gondor is laid in Episode 6, there are still a lot of stories left. So Gondor's arrival could be saved for the Ring of Power's later seasons. But who knows? Maybe they could lay the groundwork for Gondor by the end of Season 2. We'll just have to wait and watch. Let's talk more about the hints in the finale. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, continues to build the story towards Gondor, this time through Bronwyn. The Southlands is wiped out completely by Adar's army at the start of The Rings of Power Episode 7, leaving nothing but a barren wasteland of fire, ash, and shadow. It should go without saying that the Southlanders are left to find themselves a new home that hasn't been destroyed, and Bronwyn informs Galadriel of her intentions to lead her people toward an old Númenórean colony near the mouth of the Anduin. Die-hard fans of Lord of the Rings probably caught onto that because that was an Easter egg. For those who are probably confused right now, hear us out. The Pelargir reference in the Rings of Power puts the famous kingdom of the Lord of the Rings one step closer to reality, even though Gondor doesn't exist in the show yet. The Lord of the Rings describes Pelargir, so it's not a new location on the map of Middle-earth. Bronwyn describes Pelargir as a place with fresh soil and water, but in reality, it develops into the port city of Gondor, a gigantic center of human life, maritime trade, and wealth. The Southlanders of the Rings Rings of Power go west from present-day Mordor and settle in future-day Gondor, the first step of a powerful new kingdom on the horizon. Next up, why was Pelargir built anyway? Although Bronwyn refers to Pelargir as an ancient Númenórean colony, the Númenóreans in the Rings of Power seem alone on their island. When and why did they establish a community close to the River Anduin? In J.R.R. Tolkien's History of Númenor, the island had a time when it could travel between its kingdom and Middle-earth, selling products and imparting wisdom to the local mortals. But Númenor eventually turned into a closed-off, self-centered monarchy. In the novels, the Númenórean monarchs eventually start to conquer areas of Middle-earth, but in the Rings of Power, they seem to have essentially abandoned their old settlements and retreated to Númenor. The future port of Gondor, Pelargir, was originally a gathering place for Númenor's faithful. Those who still revered the Valar, valued the elves' friendship, and wanted to flee their ever-darkening home. Even though Bronwyn speaks of Pelargir as if nobody currently lives there, in Tolkien's lore, Pelargir was the home to Númenor's faithful. It's possible that when Bronwyn's group finally arrives in Pelargir, they'll run into some friendly Númenóreans, as the faithful are referenced in the Rings of Power. Moving on, could the Southlanders be Gondor's first people? Considering that the Rings of Power have already revealed that the Southlanders will settle in Pelargir, it seems likely that they'll be important in finding Gondor. According to Tolkien's account of the creation of Gondor, Elendil and his sons, Isildur and the missing Anarion, lead 9 ships out of Númenor just before it was destroyed by the gods, managing to escape the island's divine annihilation. Elendil ended up somewhere around Lindon when the ships parted ways, while his sons ended up further south, close to the mouth of the Anduin. The kingdom of Gondor was constructed in all of its glory when they came into contact and became leaders among the faithful who had settled there. Isildur and Anarion's landing place, if not the actual location of their ship docking, is likely to be near Pelargir. Plus, Isildur is already a friend of the Southlands in the Rings of Power since he helped defend its citizens from Adar. The Southlanders in the Rings of Power may become the first generation of Gondor since they put their faith in Elendil and others who helped them throughout the devastation of the Southlands. We're still playing a guessing game, but we suppose a lot of the questions will be answered when the new season drops. Next up, Nazanin Bonyadi talks about her character Bronwyn. Bronwyn is an amazing woman with a ton of inner strength and always manages to hold her own in every situation, even though she lacks any unique abilities, superhuman fighting abilities, or a life expectancy that reaches eons. But there were still some situations concerning her character that hit close to home for Bonyadi. She resonated with Bronwyn from the moment she gave her an audition for the role because she was the kind of woman who wanted the liberation of her people, just like Bonyadi does. We all know there's nothing quite like bringing something that hits you deep down to the big screen, and Bonyadi's activism for her own country, Iran, truly touched her on a personal level. Finally, how did Bronwyn grow in Season 1? According to Bonyadi, Bronwyn's inner strength only grew throughout the season and came from her character's heart. Bonyadi found that Bronwyn is driven by love of her son and Arondir, but also a strong desire to free her people from the constraints of their past. Bonyadi was on a quest to learn what it meant to be the underdog and triumph throughout the 2 years it took to film her part in the series. The actress' experience in Rings of Power has been intense for her character and significant for her as well. But with everything we've seen, we know this character will be even more epic in the next season. What did you think about the first season of the Rings of Power? Let us know in the comments below. That's it for today. If you liked the video, please leave a like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more awesome content like this.